The fin absolu du monde. The absolute end of the world. The government seized it and destroyed it.
I'm a bit obsessive. I want you to find a print for me.
We are a part of the film. If it had been destroyed, we would know.
Bakovic said film in the right hands is a weapon.
Well, a lot of it came out of my experiences working on Ain't It Cool, where for the past decade now, I have been ground zero for every sub-circle of film geek, and they all sort of converge on us. So I have seen the full force of fandom close up for about a decade now, and it is one scary face. I am freaked out by fandom more than I thought I was, and I think the internet has changed fandom. I think when I was a kid and you would go to conventions and things like that, it was always that feeling. You'd walk in the room and it was like, holy shit, I'm not the only one. This is awesome. And now there's this entitlement that has set in with film fans, where they feel as if it's not just that, okay, great, these films speak to me. It's like, you're making these films for me, and you better do what I say. And there's a very weird shift that's happened. And it has become much easier to soak yourself in film and sort of bury yourself in films and see everything that's ever been made. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. You know, my dad opened the first video store in Chattanooga, and I remember being amazed that we had 600 movies when that store opened. That's 600 different films. It's unbelievable now how accessible film is. And you can, you know, if you want to wade right in and see all the movies by Jan Svankmajer, well, they're probably available 10 minutes drive from you in some direction. And that's crazy. It's just a different world. And I think film obsession, as a result, has changed and shifted. So it definitely came out of the experiences that we had as we went to film festivals, as we met people. Scott and I had just gone to the Fantasia Film Festival in Montreal, which is, I think, the great North American film festival for genre. If you want to see science fiction, fantasy, kaiju, stuff from Russia, from Japan, from wherever, Fantasia's got aggressive programmers and really smart programmers with great taste, and they show everything. And so that year, watching the way people reacted to films and there was a movie that played there that year called In My Skin, a French film. I think it's fantastic, and it's still pretty much under everybody's radar. It's a little horror film about a woman who cuts herself, and it's an accident. She becomes so fascinated by the wound that she begins to cut herself in other places. And it becomes a very sensual act for her. And the entire movie really becomes about self-mutilation. There's a sequence in the middle of the film where the people in her life are starting to worry about her, and she decides she has to get away for the weekend to be alone with her cutting and her self-mutilation, and she checks into a hotel. It's about a 15-minute sequence of self-mutilation, and it's damn near performance art. I think the actor actually cut herself and did some things, and she directed the movie as well. The beginning of the sequence, two women got up. Opposite sides of the theater. We were up in the balcony so we could kind of see below. Two women got up on opposite sides of the theater, ran for the back of the theater. Same time. I think something set them off at the same moment. Evidently, both of them were sick as soon as they got to the lobby. At the end of the sequence, 15 minutes later, a guy gets up, turns to walk up the aisle, face down, out cold. And it's really not even that graphic. It's more what's being suggested and implied. And I'm like, I love this. I love the power that film has over people. And I love how there's that moment of trust when you walk into a theater and you're like, all right, do what you're going to do to me. Let's see what happens. And I think that's where we started. That's where the idea came from. And as we posed the hypothetical to people, 9 out of the 10 film fans that we talked to would sit and watch the movie. If it existed, if they'd heard that it existed and the opportunity arose, most of them would sit and watch it, which is crazy. But still, it seemed really potent. And everything in that film is built out of experiences we had. There's the beheading scene in that movie came from a film programmer I know who runs a festival in New Zealand. And he was offered a snuff film. And he was like, no, I don't. And the guys were like, why don't you come see it? And he drove an hour and a half out into the outback. And when he got there, it was a shack. And he said he stepped into the shack and 10 seconds later was thinking, I'm going to be the star of this movie. I need to leave now or I'm dead. And there was genuinely that feeling of, I think I made the wrong choice. When he told me that, I'm like, oh, that's going in the movie, certainly. And everybody, when we talked about tracing movies and how you would track a movie down, everybody said the same thing to us. All the guys that track rare movies start with the French. They have the best records. Everything's with the French. They have the records of everything. So it's like all these things that we ran into work their way in. I still wish we could have shot the original drafts, but we wrote a $30 million film that we then had to shoot for 1.8. So there were a lot of our favorite things that ended up on the floor.
What were some of the differences between the rough draft and the final project?
Well, there was a great news story that broke that we ran on the site about, 6 years ago, where the police in Paris were in the Paris Underground, the tunnels, and they came upon this doorway that was covered in plastic and it had police tape up. And they were pretty sure they didn't put the police tape there. So they went inside, and as soon as they broke the perimeter, dogs started to bark and freak out. And they thought at first they were about to be attacked, and they realized it was a tape. So they were like, this is crazy. They went in, they turned the tape off, they looked around, they walked a little further in, and they realized there was a theater, an actual underground movie theater with tables and chairs and a little restaurant that had been set up. And it was like a really nice, plush theater. And just in the underground, in the sewers, in the catacombs. And so they roped everything off. They unplugged all the power and everything. And they had run power down from the surface. And a few days later, when they came back to work the rest of the scene, everything was gone. And there was just a note that said, do not try and find us. Signed, the Society of the Perforated Mexicans. Who? What? That's awesome. I love the idea that there's some secret underground society showing movies in the catacombs of Paris, and when they got caught, they just moved. Well, we went to that theater in our original draft. How could you not? And that was just, okay, if we build that set, and if we do that locate, that's something else you can't do in the film. As much as I love it, it didn't actually drive us thematically forward. So there were a lot of little details like that we just had to lose. And also clearances turned out to be a nightmare. We originally wanted the film to be even more sort of real world grounded in terms of the film literacy. And lawyers will kill you when it comes to getting clearances on titles or posters or things like that. So a lot of that stuff had to be really toned down. Well, with John, I had met John when I was very young. John was the first person to ever let me on a film set when I was a kid. I was living in Tennessee at the time, and my friend's mom did extras casting, and Starman came to town, and I begged. I was like, I'll do anything. I have to be on that set at some point. And the unit publicist made arrangements with her to bring me on the set, and as we were driving out to the location and I was talking to him, I was like 12, I think, and I had been reading about the development of the film, and I was babbling on at him about, so I heard Brian De Palma was going to do this, but then he dropped out, and then Universal sold it to Columbia, and Columbia got this, and he's like, what are you? Where did you, what? Okay. And when we got to the set, he introduced me to John. He's like, John, the kid's a freak, man. He's like really into you and really into movies, so you should talk to him for a minute. And John was awesome. John put me behind the camera for the day and really went out of his way to explain how things worked and what the stunts were that they were doing and the effect that they were doing. Didn't have to. Just went out of his way, and I've always remembered that as an act of genuine kindness by him. And then when I moved to Los Angeles and I started working at a Laserdisc store, John was one of our customers, and I got a chance to sort of talk to him again there for a while, and it was interesting because he remembered me at that point, and so it was a nice sort of introduction again. And then I interviewed him for Ain't It Cool a few times. I did a Big Trouble in Little China piece with him, and just every time I ran into John, he was still that same, just real mellow, cordial, completely open to having any conversation guy. It was a little different when he walked in the room to do the film, though, because they had told us that they were showing the script to two of the directors that were attached. It was Argento and Carpenter. And it was like, oh, well, either one of those, holy shit.
Win-win.
Yeah, we win the lottery, let's go. Argento decided he really wanted to do this other piece, and Carpenter said, I like it, but I need to meet with them because I need some changes. Okay, that's intimidating. So they put us in the room with him, and 5 minutes in, the first thing he says, he sits down and he says, fellas, I gotta tell you, I really like it. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. We got a lot of work to do. And 5 minutes in, it was either cry and leave the room or buckle down and just start working with a legend. And don't take his notes as he's a legend, but take his notes as how can we make this better? How can we make this work? And ultimately our job on that was to work to his voice. You know, John has a voice that we're very aware of as a director. John has certain things that he's done or not done as a director and certain signatures, and you really want to put him in his comfort zone, especially for the kind of shoot we were doing, which is very small, very low budget, and very fast. But the more we got into it, the more we realized that he's got a reputation as being incredibly difficult. There's studios that won't work with him, young executives that are terrified by him, and they just won't work with him because they say he's difficult. He's demanding. He certainly knows what he wants, but I never once got a note from him, and he's one of the few people I can say this about, that I thought was unmotivated. Every single thing he ever brought to the table was for a reason, and it was to make the film better. Not just satisfy my ego, scratch my back, make me happy because I'm John Carpenter. It was always about the film. And I think he inspires that in people. So we had a great experience on both of the pictures. With Udo Kier, they had originally said to us Christopher Lee for the role, because one of the producers represents Chris. Unfortunately, Christopher Lee then went and did Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and became incredibly expensive. And so we had rewritten it for him. They had told us, originally I think Bellinger was sleazier. Bellinger was a real creep in the original draft, and it was very sexual and kind of decadent, and he was just gross. And they were like, Chris Lee's not going to masturbate a young Asian man on camera, so you're going to have to rewrite that. And we were like, okay, fine. And when Udo came in, I almost wish we'd gone back to the original drafts, because I think Udo not only would, but probably was in his trailer. It's funny, without having to put it back, Udo brings it anyway, because Udo's got such a creepy, skeevy thing going on that you know there's stuff that is happening off camera. Everybody, all the guys that we've worked with so far that have been sort of inspirations to us, I think have been really amazing. We've been very fortunate that way.